Hi, I'm Mark Tucker,
And I'm Alan Furstenberg. Welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hey, welcome, Alan. It's good to see you again.
Always good to see you, Mark. How are things going?
It's been busy as always. I don't know. I don't think there's been a week where I said, "Oh, I didn't really accomplish very much," and it's been really laid back. It's been busy. This has been a really event-filled, lots of work to do 2021. How about you?
Busy, very busy on a really wide range of stuff going on. Ranging from different stuff at work on a wide range of projects
Mhm.
to tackling new voice stuff and trying things out.
Yeah, so it's I've hit a lot of that. I've hit a lot of things that are new or get to expand kind of my toolbox or challenge me on how am I going to solve this problem at work and also on side projects. And and as you know, just recently I've re-released changes to a picture guesser, changing over from display templates to APL. We talked a little bit about that.
We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, and
But I've
then
but I've seen that even since then you've done some additional upgrades.
yeah, so I have done a number of different things. In fact, actually, um, Katie on her Twitch stream today did some games, and she went through Picture Guesser again, kind of looking at some of the new
Ah,
changes, and she
I
has a
really missed
couple of
something.
she has a couple of more things that she found. Uh, Drat, yay, kind of like.
Well, no,
Um,
it's always great. One of the big things we talk about when testing it is getting it in front of a bunch of people
yeah,
to make sure that you've got the whole coverage set up, and that's even more critical when it comes to voice because people can say things in you know all sorts of different ways, but people also have all sorts of different accents, and you never know how something will be picked up or understood by one person and not another.
or just the way that they use it is slightly different than the happy path that you envision.
Yeah.
So, but it's been good. So I'll just go really quickly through some of the changes. A lot of them are kind of design and flow changes. Wasn't really a lot of code. One of the things I did notice, though, that I guess that would impact you as a developer designing is I used an APL component where it would show um, three images across, and then that would be like row one, row two, row three, and so it would scroll up. And I have a couple of Echo devices. One of them being the Echo Show 5, which has limited vertical screen real estate. And I was noticing that it was showing the three different like an album, and so you start off with 7 albums. A couple of them are free, and some of them the rest of them you can buy. And then you go into an album and you get a list of photos that are inside of the album, and each of those is really a puzzle until you solve it, and then you've got the photo that you can look at. And they're typically they come in two varieties, 5 or 10 images in an album. And then when you go into a specific photo, then it opens up the puzzle screen. So there's an APL screen for the welcome screen and the exit screen. There's an APL screen for listing your albums, listing the photos in an album, and then the individual puzzle screen. So those are the different APL screens.
No,
But I was noticed. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a question about that by itself.
Yeah.
So, how do you control which APL screen is being shown at a time? That's just by uh, returning as part of it the full APL document and the data that you want to go into the template.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a specific directive for returning an APL document, and so you just include that in your response as part of what you're returning back. You're already returning back the message that you're saying and any of the reprompt information, and then you can also return back a document that there's a token, like a unique identifier for that screen that you can give, and that actually comes back as part of the request anytime that screen is up.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So
Which APL screen is being shown at a time.
Yeah, and it's in some cases what I've noticed, I think, is that if So an APL screen is made up of, well, is itself kind of it's a document that you have like a root container, which is a type of component, and that's like a non-visual, just kind of a layout component. And then inside of that, you can put buttons and headers and different things. There are a number of responsive templates, and that's what one of the things I've used for the first two screens. There's just a specific type of list screen that you provide data saying this is the image, an array of this is the image, this is the primary text, secondary text, and it builds the control itself. And so you just return that document. But what I have noticed is if you name components or give them a specific ID, in the request coming back in, you actually get additional data about that component. I think even like encoded like where the position is on the screen and some other information. I haven't necessarily used that, but there's also some information that comes in as part of the request that gives you actually additional information. I guess if you were wanting to record some of that, like what's the viewport size? So what's the, how many pixel height, width it is, and some additional things. So you actually get quite a bit of information. They don't go down to the level of like, this is an Echo Show 5, or they kind of group things by hub sizes. Yeah. So like there's a hub small, hub medium, hub large, TV. So there's different viewports that you can also check, and kind of, there are cases I conditionally change things around based on. TV is kind of a different animal in some ways. You get a lot more screen, but the DPI is different, and so the back button works differently too on a on a TV from the other ones. It's kind of interesting, but yeah. So that's a lot of the work that I had done previously, to kind of get things out by the end of August, so that we could, I could make sure that
when display templates got killed, when the cards got killed, you had
so they had something going and already figured out. So that's kind of where things were, I think, the last time we talked. So since then, I had noticed that I kind of still think about like in web terminology, where you've got things that are above the fold and below the fold. So like when you first see your screen, what do you see, and then what do you have to scroll to see? So I still think quite a bit in that way, that depending on which screen you're on, then on those list screens, the images were fairly big for what the album was, or the photos in the album. And so you really only see one row, and you'd see 3 across. And so there wasn't really a good indication. There is no scroll bar, so you don't really know that there is more stuff if you don't necessarily go look for it, or if you're not used to that scroll metaphor. Plus, there's no really affordance that tells you, is it a right-left scroll or an up-down scroll?
That's an interesting point. Is it a carousel or a list?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And so, so what I ended up doing is I was concerned that people would think that there were only 3 albums as opposed to 7. And so I did something simple. I just added to the title where it says like albums. I just said 7 albums. So I just did a count of how many albums there were. Same thing on the photos screen, listing how many photos there were. So there was a place that you could see like, oh, there's more of these things.
So how did you get people to be able to scroll down?
So in this case, I just actually changed the number of components across the screen from 3 to 4, which then made everything smaller, which then crouched up the next row. So that got cut off at the bottom. So it was kind of a hint that there was more there. So,
okay. So if they wanted to see that more, how would they do so? I mean, so I assume they could swipe on the screen.
Yep.
Is there a voice first way of doing that?
Yep. You actually, there's a scroll up, scroll down, scroll right, scroll left. And you just have to have your skill implement that, have that in the language model, but you don't have to implement it in code. APL just picks that up automatically once you've defined those.
So you have to define the intent, but you don't have to set up any handlers for it.
Nope.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I did work on kind of an idea, and I've published this out on APL Ninja, this idea of like a a button or something that would be in the bottom right corner of the scroll area to kind of indicate, oh, you can scroll down. And then when you scroll, it goes away. And when you scroll back up to the top, it reappears. Or if you tap it, it moves things up a page. Playing with the idea of adding that to Picture Guesser as well.
Okay. So that was one new addition. What else?
So that was the main changes, I think, from that perspective, as far as make sure people knew that there were photos and albums there. The next thing that I did is on some of the screens, there's enough width, but there's, still, once again, the height is kind of constrained. And so there's already a header in the top. And I had a portion where there was a question, like, because all my albums are themed. So like, if you pick an animals album, then the question is, what animal is this? Or what's the animal? And instead of taking having the main body that's scrollable have that text in it, I moved that up to the center position in the header. So you've got, like, on the left-hand side, you've got a back button to take you to the previous screen. If it's the list photos, I've got the name, kind of the title of the current screen. In the middle, I've got the question to be asked. And on the right-hand side, you've got your coins and some score value. So did that gave me a little bit, in essence, another row worth of information or space available, so I could make the puzzle a little bit bigger. Because what I was noticing on the Echo Show 5 is that there's a button at the end, at the bottom, that you can tap, where you can say, guess puzzle. And that's, you can just say the answer while you're doing it, because you could either say remove specific tile, or you can say guess, or is it a badger? I don't know, whatever, right? So you can do all of those things, but I wanted to give more clues on what things could be said, or if you just don't know what to do at all, you can click the button. Like, okay, I think I know what it is. What do I do? Instead of trying to explain, okay, well, in order to do that, then you do this and you do that. I just gave them a button that you can, tap. And so when you tap the button or just say guess, then it will repeat the question, like, what's the animal? And then the microphone opens up, and that's also kind of a nice transition back into, because you have to give the answer via voice, but you might have been doing all this tapping stuff. And so how do you, and you get 30 seconds after you do your last tap before things go down, so you can, before the skill exits, so that you can tap something, wait a little bit, tap another tile, wait a little bit, tap it. So you can be in tapping mode where it, and actually I do some stuff when you're doing that I don't actually ask a question when I open the microphone back up. I just let you keep tapping stuff. And then at some point you're like, oh, I think I know what it is. And then you can tap the buttons for, like, what's the question, and it will ask you the question, you can give it. So that button wasn't being scrolled up to the up high enough. Sometimes it was going below the fold. So made sure that we had some space there. So that was kind of the other thing. But the big change was, and I've wanted to do this for a while, I haven't ever done it, is that Alexa came out with the ability to mark a slot type as multi-valued.
Oh, yeah.
And so the way that the only place that it's implemented in Picture Guesser is that you can remove tiles by saying, like, remove tile 1, or remove 1, or just say 1. And so when you do that, then it removes the tile, and then microphone's opened up again, and you can say the next one. Well, with this multi-value slot, that intent only has one slot type, which is the tile number. So I just marked tile number as multi-slot. And so then now, instead of the typical thing that I would get back as part of the input that would come in the request, I get an additional data structure, and it either marks it as a simple or a list slot type. And then underneath there, if it's simple, it's just an individual object. And if it's a list, it's got multiple of those objects. But then you can start seeing, oh, okay, I've got multiple one of these things. And the way that that works on the user side of things, it doesn't work. Well, what you would typically do is, like, if you were ordering pizza, you'd say, I would like pepperoni, cheese, and, you know, anchovies or whatever, right?
I was afraid you were going to say anchovies.
Yeah. Well, my bad joke back when I was delivering pizza and people would ask me what my favorite type was, I told them that would be jalapenos and anchovies, which was definitely two things I would not want individually or together or on pizza. But that's beside the point. So what it was, and that works pretty good with words like that. And what you do in that case, you'd get 3 different slot values. You get a list object coming back with 3 items in it, and then you could see, oh, this is, you know, the different values. Numbers don't work quite as well as that, because you could, like when you're doing a pin or something like that, you could do 1, 2, 3, 4. So now, is that the number 1, 2, 3, 4,
right,
or is it so you have to use and in between every word. So you could do multiple. You could say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I've tested that, and it works. But as long as you're doing just a couple of them, then it's pretty easy. So it was really fairly slick, because I could just end up saying, oh, is this a simple type or is this a list type? And I just had to convert my code so that everything handled was an array instead of a single item.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the array could just have one item in it, but then it would loop things through things. And what I would do is I have to check to see, of all the numbers that you've said, I'm going to go ahead and exclude ones that the tiles have already, you know, disappeared for.
Point, yeah.
And ones that are invalid values. Like if you say 0, or, you know, and your tile boards can have 9, 16, or 25 tiles on them. So you have to check to see which type of, you know, board it is. But if it's above that number, then I just exclude those as well. So then I get a list of, these are the, you know, the ones that actually count.
Mm-hmm.
And if the number is 0, then I give a message like, oh, those you've already used those, you know, those tiles are already removed or something. If the values, well, and I also have to check if the values that come back, all of them are outside of the bounds, then I give a message that's saying, hey, you know, pick something, you know, between 1 and 25. But finally, if let's say that I said two of the tiles and they haven't been removed before, so now I have an array that has 2 items in it. Interestingly enough, and I wasn't sure how this was going to work, because what you do when you're sending, I've created a command in my APL that says remove tile, and it has a parameter, which is the number of the tile to remove.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I tap it on the screen, that just happens locally. It just says, oh, I'm intercepting the button press, so I'm going to go ahead and remove tile for the number that I just barely tapped. But I'm also can have code on the server, so when I do a voice interface that says remove tile 1, then I return back my document and I return back a different directive that is a, you know, execute command directive that says this is the same command name, custom command name that I gave, which was remove tile, and here's the number of the tile I want to remove. So in the end, the code to remove the tile and do the visual part exists in the APL, and it's either called locally when I tap locally, or from the server down to the client when I'm using voice.
Now, how does that code? What is that code written in? I mean, is it JavaScript?
It's JSON. I know.
I'm having trouble articulating a question here. What can you do with it?
It's actually fairly powerful, because we'll take a little side note, but let's put a pin in the fact that I still have to tell you what happens when I say multiple.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, but we're going to put a pin on that point, because I do want to say at the high level, APL is JSON. it's JSON that can evaluate expressions. So think of like your handlebars expression where you can have some code sprinkled throughout the template.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that, but it's really more of accessing properties or calculating values. But it does have a smattering of JavaScript functions like math.random or math.ceiling or.
Do we have loops and conditionals in it?
You don't, in the sense that that's handled a different way. So like, let's say that I have a component, let's say that it's a container, and I've got my data. So I've got my JSON, which represents my document, and I've got my JSON, which represents the data that I'm passing to that document. And let's say if in that data that I'm passing, there is a property on there, which is of type array, which then has an object for each item in the array, and maybe that has like an ID and a value. And so I'm going to show on the screen a list of values. What I can do at that component level is the container component level, there's a data property. I can assign the data property of that container component to the property inside of my data JSON, which is the array. So then what I can do, kind of a la way templating stuff works, is I can have a child, because every component can have an items collection where it has one or more child items in it. So now in the parent container control, I could create a component, let's say it's a text component, and I could bind that to the name property. But because the parent has the array as the thing that it's bound to, then the child, I can just do the properties of the individual child object. So like name. And so what happens is then, and I only have to do that once. And then what it's going to do is it's going to repeat that automatically.
So it creates one child for each element in the array.
Right.
Huh.
And there's also a and that's items, and I think there's like there's one for like the first item and the last item too. So you could do something different for the first or the last items. So that's how you kind of do the looping and do like list controls based on the templating of it.
And how did you take advantage of this for picture get? Because it sounds like you must have used this when you, so I'm guessing that if I said, remove 3 and 4, it's sending down an array with 3 and 4, and it maps that in your function and calls the function twice.
Actually, so I thought I might have to do that, but I tried something different, and it worked, and so I'm going with it. So when you return back a response from your skill code, you can return back a directive, and it's actually a directives array. Typically, there's only one thing in that directives array, and it's the object. It's the document of what's your APL. But I had told you that there's a second type of directive for when I'm sending a command from the server to be handled on the client. So a command is really just a JSON object that has a custom name, and then there's an array inside of there where there are some specific commands I can do, like set property or play sound, or so I just structure things up and inside of that. So what happens on the server side, since I'm already going through a loop and I've got 2 items that are on the server side that says, oh, he said 1 and 2, then I just add 2 directives to that directives array that is the same command with 2 different parameters for 1 and 2. So, and things get processed sequentially on the client side. So, and it's the client side that when I tap on it and it executes the remove tile command where it plays the sound ding that I've removed the tile, right? So it worked out really nice. I say remove 1 and 2, And then all of a sudden I say bing for one, bing for two, and I'm good to go.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty funny. I was like, I wasn't sure how much time it was going to take, so I had I had to understand what the structure was on the JSON side, on the input to well, how are they handling multi-values now? Then I had to figure out, okay, so how do I get to that inside of Jovo? But they've handled that really nicely as well. They've got kind of some convenience properties on this input object. So you have like input dot, well, it's basically request dot input dot, the name of the slot. And so they have some convenience stuff that's right off of there, but you could also do dot, what is it? Alexa skill. And so then you get to exactly what Alexa had passed you.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was able to just get right into that and figure that out. So that probably took the most time. Then I, had handled the extra condition about, well, what happens if I do things out of bounds, or say things that have already been, tiles that have already been removed. So those were, I handled that situation. And then I'm like, well, this is already in a loop. Directives is an array. Let's just see what happens.
That makes sense.
and it worked. I was like, okay, cool. And total like beginning to end, it probably took about 30 minutes to figure and implement. And I'm pretty happy how it turned out. I'm liking the fact that you can remove multiple tiles via voice. Yeah,
that's very nice. Any other big changes came with that you want to talk about?
No, those were the the big ones. I did do another change where when you're inside of the picture puzzle, the only button that shows up is when you're ready to guess, like, what is it, or guess puzzle. But once you solve it, nothing else was on the screen other than the back button. So in essence, you'd had to manually go back to the album to then pick the next picture. So I added a new toolbar or button bar to replace where the guess puzzle button was. I've got one that takes me back to my albums. So it's just labeled my albums. So it skips 2 levels back and goes to my albums and starts over at the very beginning. And the next one is a next button. So when you do the next button, it just
advances to the next puzzle.
It just advances to the next puzzle. If that puzzle's been solved, it just shows you the picture and says, I'm glad that you've already solved this puzzle. And it's got the same back to my albums and next. Now, when you hit one that you haven't solved, then those buttons aren't there. It's the guess puzzle. And so then you solve the puzzle, but then you can go right next. And then when you're at the very last one and you do next, it takes you back to your album with all of your pictures. At that point, you can look at your pictures.
Or go to a different album.
Or go to a different album. Yeah. So I kind of streamlined that flow. So hopefully keep people in. It's like, oh, I solved the next one. Oh, next. And just kind of keep them in there as opposed to back and then back in and back. So.
No, sounds very, very cool.
Yep.
I think one of the interesting things that I found kind of interesting from it is this notion of, just saw this feature, wanted to try it, integrated it, tried something that was new, and it worked in 30 minutes. So I think that notion of just experimenting is really a big hallmark of things that we do a lot with voice. And I thought that was interesting to learn about.
Yeah, and it's nice when that happens, because that kind of counters all the times where you think it's going to take an hour and it takes you 3 or something like that. So
yeah, I'd love to hear from our listeners. What are the sorts of things that you've just kind of poked at and experimented with, and they worked out or they didn't work out? It didn't work the way you thought it would, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback.
Yeah, thank you for watching and listening. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll catch you next time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, everybody. Have a good week, Mark.
Yeah, you take care, Alan, too. Thanks.